So last week, Unity did some stuff and it made everybody mad. Developers, content creators, artists, asset developers, game developers, you name it. Everybody got together as one big community and said, no, this new runtime fee schedule is terrible. It's not going to fly. We're done with you guys. Well, today, September 22nd, Mark Whitten, the president of Unity, finally broke the silence, the week-long silence of this debacle, and finally came through and tried to clarify what the actual new runtime plan will be. So if you're not familiar with what's going on, I released a video last week that covers all this, the initial runtime fee schedule that Unity had announced that caused all this chaos. And in today's letter, Mark Whitten had released an apology basically saying that, this was our mistake. We didn't listen to you guys. We kind of rushed this through. And then they really roughly just outlined what the new terms would be. So everybody's been holding their breath. It's been a punch in the gut this past week. It was hard to get work done, and I can see that sentiment was shared entirely across the community. Most of us were just up in arms over this whole thing, waiting very, I would say, not so patiently for this to happen, and we finally got a response today. So let's dig into what the response was. So what are the big updates here? Well, there's a few of them, and the first one was they basically walked back the retroactive application of the runtime fees to older versions of Unity. So it's only going to apply these new runtime fee schedule, and all this stuff that you're hearing about will only apply to Unity versions greater than the one that's releasing next year. I believe they're going to call it 2023 LTS, long-term support. So that will be the 2024 version of Unity. If you've made a game and it's on an older version of Unity, underneath that version or before that version, you won't be applicable to these fees. But in the event that you do update your game and upgrade to that latest version, it will be subject to the latest terms of service for these runtime fees. Another big issue was installs are no longer referred to as installs. They created this term called initial engagement. So what that means is any legitimate install. So not a developer install for testing, not some malicious installs, not someone that's just bought the game and got a refund. And this was also clarified during the fireside chat between Jason Weinman and Mark Whitten, who is the Unity president. And Jason asked, well, you guys had talked about this proprietary algorithm tracking and installed in the game, essentially spyware on all of our games, and Mark clarified that no, they are not pursuing that. There is not going to be any tracking there. They're basically saying that all developers and studios will be responsible to self-report the data and the fees that they are required to pay. And another thing to highlight with this install thing is it's not going to be per install. It's kind of per user. So what that means is if you have a game out and somebody bought your game and they install it on all 4 of their devices, that only still counts as one install. They're not going to count duplicates. And what about the app distribution channels like Microsoft Game Pass and game bundles and that sort of thing? And Mark kind of gave a roundabout answer where they weren't really exactly sure what those examples were going to look like. So they were going to work with the community to try to come up with something that makes sense. But again, the runtime fees are going to apply, and that's something that they were just saying because they weren't exactly sure what those larger distributors were going to actually do or how they were going to apply the fees and all this stuff. So that's still kind of a gray area. But again, you can look at the 2.5 gross revenue share or the initial engagements as your 2 options there. And like I said, the tracking thing was rolled back and it's going to be all self-reporting. So the devs or the studios are going to be looking at their numbers and they are going to be reporting that to Unity. This is how many installs I had. This is what we owe you, or this was our gross revenue. Here's your 2.5%. And so let's talk about that. So the really underlying big change here is they added this 2.5% gross revenue share model where if your per initial engagement is over 2.5%, well, then you can just revert back to that max cap of 2.5% of your revenue. So if your game made $1 million and the initial engagement fee structure or the fee schedule was costing you more than what 2.5% of your gross revenue was, well, then you would just fall back to the 2.5% revenue. So on top of your pro and enterprise monthly or yearly fee that you would owe as well. So what are the changes to the plans? So let's start with personal. So personal used to have a $100,000 cap. Now it's at $200,000, and you used to have to pay fees from the install fee schedule per different tier, and they did away with all that. So there's no runtime install fees at all for the personal plan. Just that once you hit $200,000, you're now going to be subject to the Pro yearly subscription fee. So you're going to have to upgrade all your developers to Pro once you hit that $200,000 mark. And at that point, you're still not going to be charged any additional fees until you hit the minimum thresholds for the Pro and or Enterprise memberships, which is 1 million installs and 1 million revenue. And they also did away with the splash screen requirement. Okay, so let's move on to Pro and Enterprise. So they're going to basically operate the same as the initial rollout that they had. There is a minimum threshold that you have to get to before those fees kick in. So for Pro and Enterprise, there's a yearly subscription. I think Pro is about $2,000 and Enterprise is sitting around $4 something. And once you hit 1 million installs for the lifetime of your game and 1 million in revenue for the last trailing 12 months, then you're going to be subject to that runtime install engagement tier structure, where you're going to be paying like a small fee per install based on like the number of installs for that month. So that part really hasn't changed. But what they're going to allow you to do now is pick between their gross revenue share number, which is 2.5%, and the initial engagements tier structure that I just mentioned. So whichever is lower, you're going to just pick the lesser of the two, and you report that to Unity as a developer or a studio. You just say, okay, these are my numbers for this month. Go ahead and invoice me for that. And again, these all apply to the 2024 version coming out, which I believe is called 2023 LTS. Okay, so let's take a quick look at the new calculator and see how to use it. So here's just the Unity Personal tab here, and they just ask you, has your business exceeded $200,000 and are you using the latest version? And once you hit yes to both of those, they're saying like, okay, you need to upgrade to Pro. So that's just really all that is. So it's kind of a nothing thing there. And then once you get to Unity Pro, again, here's the 1 million threshold of installs and revenue. And of course you have to use that latest version. So we'll just hit yes on all those. And they present you with a monthly revenue slider and also a initial engagement slider. So let's just take a look at that Reddit example that I was poking around with last week. So I think they were saying that they had about 100,000. Let's just enter it in. They had about $100,000 in revenue and I think 500,000 monthly engagements. So at that point, you're only looking at about $2,500 a month, which is much lower than that initial $45,000 fee that they were going to charge based on that tier schedule over here. So that's going to be a huge change to some of these developers. They're going to be impacted a lot less. This is going to be I mean, nobody wants to pay more money, but compared to what that other thing was, this is going to be a much better deal. But like, what about if, let's just say you're sitting at about 2 million monthly revenue and only about like 150 installs. So they're reporting that you would owe about $15,000. So I don't really trust these numbers. So let's just take a look at the calculator really quick and see what we can find. So sitting at 2 million revenue and 150,000 monthly engagements, if you look at the tier structure, well, let's just first calculate what 2.5% of that is. So you're looking at owing $50,000 if you were going to use their 2.5% gross revenue share. Okay, so let's just look at what it's like for the initial engagement fee structure. So for the first 100,000, you're going to owe $15,000, and that's based off this 0.15 tier here. And then we'll just add to it the remaining fees, which is the second tier here at 0.075, which comes out to $3,750 because you have 50,000 installs. And so you're looking at about $18,750. So in this case, if you're making 2 million and you have 150 initial engagements a month, you can expect to be paying around $18,000. Now, I'm not sure where they get this 15,000 number from. I'm a little suspect of it because the math doesn't add up unless I have an error in my math, but I can definitely say that 18,000 is less than 50,000. Even if I'm off by a couple $1,000s, that's still better. So I don't know if they're just like trying to sweeten the deal and making it look a little better here, but this is definitely better where if you had this kind of weird lopsided install versus revenue ratio, that you would be able to fall back to that initial engagement and pick the lesser of the two. So if you're a small game dev or a studio, play around with these sliders, kind of get an idea of what you would expect, and then also come up with a few examples based on your actual revenue or your actual installs or what you expect to make for those two numbers, and look at this tier schedule here. Do your research and make sure it makes sense to you, and make sure the numbers make sense to you. And if they don't, report it to Unity. They need to know this kind of stuff. So, and just to wrap up with a couple more things, they are keeping the 30-day offline thing. So you have to be logged into the Unity hub at some point every 30 days, or they kind of kick you out of it. They put the GitHub terms of service back up. Mark Whitten said that, you know, he wasn't really aware of that, and so he's claiming that they're going to try to be more transparent and forward and engage with the community on that sort of thing and make sure that doesn't happen again. We'll see. The Plus subscribers are going to have a sunset date to be determined within the next year or so, and they're going to give them some kind of upgrade offer for the Pro. Basically, it's just this 2.5 gross revenue share or the initial engagement. So that's really the big change here. The retroactive applying to old Unity versions is gone, so that's great. And you know, they've cleaned up their terms of service, and they you know, they've got their tail between their legs here. But you know, what does that mean for the community? Well, we've all kind of lost our trust a little bit, you know, and I'm proud that everybody stepped up and, you know, put their feet to the fire, because this would have been a much worse plan, the one they rolled out before. I'm not saying I love this initial engagement thing or this like per install thing. It still seems a little clunky. You know, if you're a small studio, you're already going to be paying yearly subscription fees for the Pro and Enterprise plans, or at least for the Pro plan if you're a small studio. And you know, you got 5 devs, times that by 2,000. You know, you're looking at that every year plus the install. So it's still not going to be great, and I'm not totally happy with it. I think this is better than what they had initially released, because that was a dumpster fire. But if this is let me know in the comments how this is impacting you, and you know, what your opinion is on this, and you know, maybe this is affecting you in a way that we're not thinking about, because we need to know this kind of thing so that we can report it back to the people that need to hear it. So let me know what you think, and again, as always, subscribe and like if you enjoyed this video, and let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching.